In the bright, sterile aisles of the base exchange, they saw only a worn-out flight jacket on a limping woman. They whispered jokes, utterly blind to the fact that its faded fabric was a shroud for forgotten heroes. The morning air over Vanguard Air Force Base tasted of jet fuel and freshly cut grass, a scent unique to military installations where order is imposed even on the atmosphere. F-22 Raptors, sleeping giants on the flight line, caught the first rays of the rising sun, their canopies gleaming like obsidian. The rhythmic thud of boots on pavement echoed from a distant squadron doing their morning PT, a steady heartbeat for the sprawling base. Within this world of razor-sharp precision and polished uniformity, Dr. Aris Thorne moved like a ghost. At a glance, she seemed out of place, a soft-edged anomaly in a high-definition world. She navigated the base with a quiet familiarity, her gait marked by a subtle, carefully controlled hesitation with each step of her right leg, a private cadence set by a rhythm of old pain. Her hair, the color of storm clouds, was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun that defied the loose strands framing a face etched with a quiet intensity. Her destination was the base exchange, the BX, a cathedral of consumerism plopped in the middle of a warrior's world. As the automatic doors hissed open, she instinctively tugged at the collar of her jacket. It was a sand-colored tactical flight jacket, a relic from a life that officially never existed. The nylon was soft with age, the cuffs frayed into gentle fringes, and the elbows were worn so thin you could almost see the pattern of the shirt beneath. In a place where crisp new uniforms were a measure of pride, her jacket was an act of defiance, or perhaps, of memory. She wore it like a second skin, a tangible link to the ghosts she carried. Inside, the BX hummed with the mundane energy of a Tuesday morning. Young airmen with fresh haircuts debated the merits of different energy drinks. A pilot's wife, a toddler in her shopping cart, navigated the cereal aisle. Retired NCOs, their allegiance sworn to the free coffee station, solved the world's problems from plastic chairs. Aris retrieved a dark blue shopping basket, its plastic cool against her skin, and began her methodical patrol of the aisles, a folded list her only guide. She paused in front of the canned soups, her focus absolute. Her fingers, one marked by a thin, silvery scar that ran across the back of her wrist like a misplaced thread, traced the labels. The scar was a map of a single, chaotic moment, a scalpel, a shredded artery, and the frantic need to save a life under a sky filled with fire. Now, it merely served to point out the best deal on chicken noodle. Money was a constant, low-grade pressure. The VA benefits that should have been her due were lost in a labyrinth of redactions and sealed files, her service a paradox the bureaucracy couldn't solve. That's when she felt their eyes on her. Two young officers, first lieutenants by the gleaming silver bars on their flight suits, rounded the corner. They radiated the effortless confidence of men who had never known failure. The taller one, with a jawline that seemed engineered by a focus group, was talking animatedly. "The new F-35 simulator is a joke," he said, his voice carrying. "The haptics are all wrong. It feels more like a video game than a 7G turn." His companion, shorter and with an eager, almost predatory energy, nodded. "Tell me about it." Vance, the new guy, nearly crashed it twice. Then his gaze landed on Aris. He stopped mid-stride. His eyes did a quick, dismissive scan, the limp, the severe bun, and finally, the jacket. A smirk curled the corner of his mouth. Speaking of old hardware, he murmured to his friend, just loud enough to slice through Aris's concentration. Aris didn't flinch. Her expression remained a carefully composed mask of neutrality, but beneath the worn fabric of the jacket, her shoulders tightened. It was a familiar sensation, a flicker of ice in her veins that she had long ago learned to master. She selected 2 cans of tomato soup, their weight a small, solid comfort in her basket. The taller lieutenant, Decker, let out a low chuckle. "Must have pulled that out of her dad's attic. Thing looks like it survived Desert Storm, the first one." "Nah, man," the other, Vance, countered with a grin. "That's a classic surplus bin find. Probably got it for $10 on Vintage Military Day." Their laughter was quiet but sharp, a pair of scissors snipping at the edges of her composure. She ignored them, her focus locked on her list. Pasta. Coffee filters. Eggs. Each item was a small anchor to the present, a bulwark against the memories their casual cruelty threatened to stir. She turned the corner into the next aisle, the slight drag of her leg feeling more pronounced under their watchful, mocking gaze. The ghosts were quiet today, but they were always listening. Aris moved toward the pasta section, the squeak of a wheel on her shopping basket a tiny, irritating counterpoint to the thrum of the overhead lights. The lieutenants followed, their original errand seemingly abandoned in favor of this new, more entertaining diversion. Their voices, no longer whispers, became a running commentary that trailed her like a plume of toxic exhaust. As she reached for a box of angel hair pasta on a high shelf, the sleeve of her jacket slid back, exposing more of the surgical scar on her wrist. The movement pulled at her right shoulder, and a sharp, electric jolt shot down her arm. She masked the wince with a slow, deliberate breath, a technique honed over 2 decades of managing pain that had no official cause. The physical therapists had used words like permanent nerve damage and limited mobility, but Aris had learned to negotiate with her body's limitations, treating them like stubborn but predictable adversaries. "You think that scar is from actual service?" Vance mused, his voice now at a conversational volume, clearly intended to be overheard. Or did she just have a run-in with a can opener? Decker smirked. Hard to tell these days. It's the Stolen Valor starter pack, right? An old jacket, a limp, and a vague story about classified ops no one can check. He gestured with his chin towards Aris. Probably on her way to the VA to try and scam a bigger disability check. The accusation hung in the air, greasy and thick. It wasn't just a joke about her clothes anymore, it was an attack on her integrity. Aris's hand closed around the pasta box, her knuckles turning white for a brief second before she consciously relaxed them and placed it in her basket. Her heart hammered a hard, angry rhythm against her ribs, but her face remained a blank canvas. She reached into her jacket's inner pocket, her fingers brushing against the cold, milled edge of a heavy coin, a secret anchor in a sea of contempt. She pulled out her grocery list, and for a fleeting second, the corner of a small, nondescript item, an old data chip on a paracord necklace tucked under her shirt, became visible before she adjusted her collar. Only she knew it held the unfiltered audio logs from a mission that had been wiped from history. She continued her shopping, adding milk and eggs to her basket, a fortress of calm in the face of their escalating mockery. The lieutenant's audience grew. A young airman, stocking shelves nearby, caught their eye and offered a hesitant grin, unsure of the protocol for mocking a civilian on aisle 5. When Aris stopped at the dairy case, Decker saw his chance to widen the circle. He clapped the young airman on the shoulder. "What do you think, kid? That jacket look authentic to you?" The airman, barely out of tech school, glanced from his superior's gleaming bars to Aris's faded jacket. He read the room, understood the assignment. "Looks pretty retro, sir. Almost the real deal." "Almost" is the key word, Decker boomed, loud enough now that a woman with a stroller a few feet away shot them a nervous look and quickly steered her cart away. Aris closed the dairy case door with a soft click. She turned toward the checkout lanes, her limp more pronounced now. Long periods of standing always agitated the nest of damaged nerves in her hip. She could feel the stares of a dozen people on her back, a physical weight of judgment. Her final stop before the checkout was the customer service counter. It was a quarterly ritual she dreaded. To maintain her on-base housing privileges, she had to verify her address, a simple task made impossible by her classified history. She took her place in line, shifting her weight to her left leg. Behind her, she heard Decker and Vance get in line to pay. "Watch this," Decker said to his friend. "The grand finale. She'll try to get the veterans discount and they'll ask for her ID. It's gonna be a train wreck." Next, a cheerful voice called out. Aris stepped forward to the counter. A young woman named Kylie, according to her name tag, smiled brightly. how can I help you today? I need to verify my current address for base records, Aris said, her voice steady. She slid her base access card across the counter. Of course, Kylie said, typing. Are you active duty, or a dependent? Veteran, Aris stated. Kylie's fingers paused over the keyboard. Okay, I'll just need to see your veteran ID card or a copy of your DD-214, please. Here it was. The familiar wall. My service records are under a special security classification, Aris explained, the words tasting like rust in her mouth. She produced a folder containing a letter from the Department of Defense Records Office, a document that both confirmed and denied her existence in the same breath. Kylie's smile faltered. She looked at the letter, her brow furrowed in confusion. I'm not trained for this kind of exception. Let me get my supervisor. As Kylie hurried away, Aris felt the lieutenant's presence behind her, their smug satisfaction radiating like heat. The stage was set. The humiliation was about to become official. The supervisor, a woman in her 50s named Mrs. Gable, arrived with an air of brisk, no-nonsense efficiency. She wore her authority like a starched uniform, her expression one of someone who had seen every trick in the book and was impressed by none of them. She took Aris's folder and examined the letter with a critical eye, her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of judgment. From behind, Decker's voice, now pitched for a small crowd, dripped with condescending expertise. It's a classic grift, he explained to the airmen and anyone else within earshot. They get a letter from some obscure office, claim national security, and hope the person at the counter is too intimidated or too busy to question it. All for a 10% discount on toothpaste. A few people chuckled. The cashier at the next register overshook her head with a knowing sigh. Aris stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on a crack in the linoleum floor. She was no longer a person, she was a spectacle, a cautionary tale about imposters. Mrs. Gable finally looked up, her expression a mixture of pity and bureaucratic finality. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said, her voice devoid of any real apology. These documents do not meet our requirements for veteran status verification. We need standard documentation. A DD-214. A federally issued veteran ID. This letter is insufficient. These are the only documents I am authorized to carry, Aris replied, her voice dangerously even. The frustration was a physical thing, a hot coil tightening in her gut. For years, she had walked this same circle of logic. Her service with Task Force Chimera was so deeply classified that normal records were a fantasy, yet the injuries she'd sustained in that service required care in the real world. Each rejection was another layer of erasure. Then I'm afraid I can't update your information in our system, the supervisor concluded, already sliding the folder back across the counter. You'll need to take this up with the VA directly. That's why I'm here, Aris said, the futility of it all threatening to crack her composure. The VA sent me here to verify my address before my appeals hearing. The lieutenants, having now paid for their items, swaggered closer to the customer service desk, emboldened by Aris's public defeat. This was their moment of triumph. Vance shook his head dramatically. Unbelievable. The nerve of some people. Decker took it a step further. He looked directly at the growing number of onlookers, his voice ringing with self-righteous indignation. You know what this is? This is stolen valor. Right here, in our own BX. People who do this spit on the memory of everyone who ever wore a uniform for real. They should be prosecuted. The words hit Aris like a physical blow. Stolen valor. The ugliest accusation you could level at someone in this world. It was a brand, a public shaming. She saw the expressions around her shift from detached amusement to active hostility. She was no longer just a curiosity, she was a fraud, a thief of honor. Mrs. Gable offered a final, meaningless shrug. Perhaps you could try the main administration building. Aris took back her folder of useless papers, her movements precise and deliberate. she tucked it into the inner pocket of her jacket. As she did, the heavy, custom-milled challenge coin inside shifted, its weight a secret defiance. Its surface was cold against her knuckles, engraved with the snarling, three-headed beast of a chimera, a symbol that meant nothing to them, and everything to her. "Thank you for your time," she said quietly. The dignity in her voice was a weapon they hadn't anticipated. She collected her shopping basket and turned to leave, her path now a gauntlet. The lieutenants stood like twin pillars of arrogance, smirking. The other faces in the small crowd were a blur of pity, contempt, and uncomfortable embarrassment. Aris straightened her shoulders, letting decades of ingrained military bearing take over. Her spine became a steel rod. She locked her eyes on the automatic doors at the far end of the BX, her destination a sanctuary of anonymity. She walked. Each step was measured. The slight limp was still there, but now it seemed less a sign of weakness and more a mark of endurance. The whispers followed her like stray dogs nipping at her heels. The bright, unforgiving sunlight beyond the glass doors promised escape. The doors began to slide open, a gateway to freedom from the suffocating judgment of the crowd. As the automatic doors slid apart, they revealed not the open expanse of the parking lot, but another uniform. This one, however, was different. It was immaculate, pressed to a razor's edge, and on its shoulders gleamed the unmistakable, celestial configuration of 4 stars. General Alistair Sterling, commander of Air Combat Command, strode into the BX, flanked by 2 stone-faced aides. He was a man carved from granite and resolve, with close-cropped silver hair and an aura of command so potent it seemed to alter the air pressure around him. His attention was locked on a tablet in his aide's hand. "Those sortie readiness figures for the 33rd are unacceptable," he was saying, his voice a low rumble of authority. "I want a full systems diagnostic on their entire fleet by 1800. No excuses." "Yes, sir," the aide replied, fingers flying across the screen. Instinctively, Aris shifted to the side, pulling her basket closer to her body to clear a path. It was the automatic deference any civilian, or any unacknowledged ghost, pays to a 4-star general. Her eyes were downcast, focused on the polished floor tiles, hoping to simply melt into the background and disappear. She had almost made it past them when General Sterling looked up, his gaze sweeping the entrance in a quick, habitual security assessment. His eyes passed over Aris for a fraction of a second, a woman in a faded jacket, a limp, nothing of note. And then he froze. It wasn't a gradual stop. It was as if every circuit in his body had shorted out at once. His forward momentum ceased, his body going rigid. The tablet, the aides, the entire world outside this one moment vanished. His gaze, sharp enough to cut steel, locked onto the space above the left breast pocket of Aris's jacket. To everyone else, it was just a patch of faded, sand-colored fabric. The original embroidery was long gone, worn away by years of sun, sand, and relentless washing. But to a man like Sterling, a man who had seen the things he had seen, it was not empty. A phantom outline remained, a ghost of stitches visible only to the initiated. It was the spectral silhouette of a snarling, 3-headed beast, the Chimera. The general's aides, caught off guard, took 2 more steps before realizing their commander was no longer with them. They turned, their expressions morphing from professional focus to baffled concern. The low hum of the BX seemed to fade into an absolute, ringing silence. Without taking his eyes off Aris, General Sterling handed the tablet to his nearest aide. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Then, with a motion so crisp it seemed to tear the air, he snapped to the position of attention. His back was ramrod straight, his chin tucked. He raised his right hand in a flawless, formal salute. The universe seemed to hold its breath. A 4-star general, in the middle of the BX, saluting a civilian woman in a worn-out jacket. It was a violation of protocol. It was an impossibility. It was happening. Aris froze, the plastic handle of her shopping basket suddenly feeling like a 1,000-pound weight. Time warped. Conversations died mid-sentence. shopping cart stopped rolling. The lieutenants, Decker and Vance, who had been enjoying their victory near the exit, went completely still. The smirks on their faces didn't just fade, they were violently erased, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief that quickly curdled into sheer panic. For Aris, the general's salute was a key turning a lock that had been rusted shut for 20 years. Muscle memory, deeper and more profound than any conscious thought, took over. She carefully transferred her basket to her left hand, set it silently on the floor, and brought her own hand up in a return salute. The movement was fluid, certain, and perfect. In that single motion, the weary, limping civilian vanished, and in her place stood a soldier. "Dr. Thorne," General Sterling said, his voice carrying with resonant clarity in the stunned silence. He used her title, a deliberate act of respect. Task Force Chimera. Operation Nightfall. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a password spoken across the abyss of 2 decades. He was acknowledging a legend. "Ghost," he added, his voice dropping slightly, using her call sign. 22 years collapsed into a single, searing moment. The desert night, the smell of ozone and blood, the desperate, impossible choice. "Yes, sir," Aris confirmed. Her voice was no longer the quiet murmur of before. It was strong, steady, and clear. The general lowered his salute, and Aris mirrored the action. The BX was a wax museum. Every eye was locked on them, a silent, captive audience to a drama they couldn't possibly comprehend. "At ease, Doctor," the general said, the title now a clear honorific. He dismissed his bewildered aides with a curt gesture. "Wait for me outside. Now." They vanished, their retreat as swift as their confusion was vast. Sterling stepped closer, his voice now quieter, but in the profound silence, every word was a thunderclap. "It was your team," he said, his eyes boring into hers. "The Zargos Mountains. 3 of our pave lows were down. Hostiles were on all sides. We were dead. Your team, you created a corridor of fire that saved 32 souls. You saved my soul." The onlookers began to understand. This wasn't about a jacket. This was about history. A secret, bloody piece of history, being spoken aloud for the very first time. The faces of Decker and Vance had turned the color of ash. The ground had opened up beneath them, and they were in freefall. The general's eyes softened with a deep, ancient pain. "How many of you made it home from that op, Ghost?" he asked, his tone heavy with the knowledge of what the answer would be. Aris's gaze did not waver. 3 of us, sir. I'm the last one now." A flicker of profound sorrow crossed General Sterling's face, a momentary crack in his stoic facade. He absorbed the information with a slight, tight nod. The cost of that night had always been a ghost in his own memory, now, it had a face and a voice. He gestured toward the small cafe area tucked into a corner of the BX. "Would you join me for coffee, Doctor? I believe we have 2 decades of catching up to do." "Of course, sir," Aris replied, the words of protocol a welcome anchor in the swirling vortex of the moment. As they walked toward the cafe, the crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. The air was thick with a mixture of awe, shame, and unadulterated curiosity. The lieutenants, Decker and Vance, remained rooted to the spot near the exit, paralyzed by the enormity of their blunder. Their careers were flashing before their eyes, and the picture wasn't pretty. They settled at a small, secluded table. A young airman from the cafe counter, pale and visibly trembling at the sight of 4 stars ordering a latte, rushed over. "Just coffee, black," the general said, his voice gentle but firm. "The same," Aris added. When the airman had scurried away, Sterling leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. The full force of his attention was now on her. "I've often wondered what happened to Chimera after the debriefing," he began. "Everything just vanished. The reports were buried so deep even my clearance couldn't touch them. It was like you never existed." That was the design, sir, Aris explained, cradling the warm mug the airman delivered with shaking hands. Task Force Chimera operated under triple-blind protocols. Mission parameters, team composition, our very existence was compartmentalized. Plausible deniability wasn't just a strategy, it was our entire reality. For good reason, the general acknowledged, his eyes distant with memory. Operation Nightfall prevented a geopolitical catastrophe that would have plunged the entire region into open war. The official story was, training exercise gone wrong. They gave medals for finding a lost weather balloon that year, but for saving a war, you got silence. He took a sip of his coffee. What brings you to Vanguard, Doctor? Last I knew, the survivors were encouraged to retire quietly. Medical appeal, sir, Aris answered, the two words a summary of years of grinding frustration. I've been trying to get the VA to recognize injuries sustained during operations without being able to reference the operations themselves. Sterling's eyes narrowed. The extraction from Nightfall, he stated, understanding immediately. The RPG that hit the ravine wall above you. Aris nodded. My right leg and shoulder. The shrapnel. The medical records exist, but they're sealed under the same classification as the mission. The VA administrators see a gap in my file, and I see a rejection letter. The general's expression hardened into granite. That ends today. He pulled out his personal cell phone, his thumb moving across the screen with furious precision. He put it to his ear. This is Sterling. Yes, connect me to the SEC-DEF's direct line. No, I don't care what time it is in DC, tell him it's a Chimera protocol. He paused, listening. Alistair, it's me. I need you to pull a file. Task Force Chimera, Operation Nightfall, Zargos Mountains, 03. I need a partial declassification, medical records only, for one of the operators. Yes, that one. Authorization code Sterling Omega 09er. I don't care about the Congressional Oversight Committee. Override it. This is a direct order from a field commander invoking the Sentinel Doctrine. Get it done. He ended the call and placed the phone on the table with a decisive click. His gaze met Aris's. Bureaucracy is a beast, but occasionally, you have to remind it who holds the leash. Your service will not be erased any longer, Doctor. Thank you, sir, Aris said, the words feeling inadequate. The relief was so immense it was dizzying. Their moment was interrupted by the hesitant approach of two figures, Lieutenants Decker and Vance. They looked pale and smaller than they had just minutes before. They stopped a respectful distance from the table and snapped to attention. Sir, Decker said, his voice tight and strained. Request permission to speak to Dr. Thorne. General Sterling glanced at Aris, a silent question in his eyes. She gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Granted, the general said, his tone glacial. Decker took a deep breath and faced Aris. Ma'am. Doctor. I wish to offer my most profound and unconditional apology for my conduct. It was unprofessional, inexcusable, and deeply disrespectful. There is no excuse for what we said or how we acted. Vance stepped forward, his face flushed with shame. We failed to uphold every value we swore to defend, ma'am. We judged you on your appearance and acted with arrogance and cruelty. We are ashamed. Aris studied them for a long moment, seeing not just the terrified officers before her, but the raw, unformed clay of future leaders. You couldn't have known, she said finally, her voice devoid of malice. That was the entire point of units like mine. We operated in the shadows so others could serve in the light. That doesn't excuse our failure, ma'am, Decker insisted. We made an assumption, and we were wrong. Terribly wrong. A lesson, then, General Sterling interjected, his voice cutting like a razor, that you will carry with you for the rest of your careers. You will remember this moment every time you look at a veteran, and you will choose respect over suspicion. Am I understood? Yes, sir, they both replied in unison. Now get out of my sight, he dismissed them. As they beat a hasty retreat, Sterling turned back to Aris. Your jacket, he said, his eyes on the faded fabric. I remember Chimera wore modified combat patterns. That flight jacket isn't standard issue. Aris ran her fingers over the worn sleeve, a gesture of deep reverence. It belonged to our team leader, she said softly. Call sign, Rook. Master Sergeant O'Connell. He didn't make it back from nightfall. The general's expression softened. Rook. I remember the name. A titan of a man. The official report said he was lost in a training accident. He held the perimeter by himself so we could get the diplomatic team to the secondary LZ, Aris said, her voice quiet. His last order was for us not to come back for him. This jacket, it was all that made it back besides his dog tags. I was his 2IC. It came to me. The general nodded slowly, the weight of her 20-year vigil settling in the space between them. And you've carried his memory ever since. It's the least I could do, sir, she replied. It's the least any of us can do. 3 months later, Aris Thorne walked through the same automatic doors of the Vanguard BX. The base still hummed with its morning rituals, but for Aris, the entire world had shifted on its axis. She still wore the sand-colored flight jacket, but it was different now. It had been professionally cleaned and preserved. And on the space above the left breast pocket, a new patch had been meticulously recreated, the snarling, three-headed emblem of Task Force Chimera, rendered in subdued, respectful tones. Below it, a small, gleaming pin represented the Presidential Unit Citation, an honor awarded 20 years late, in a ceremony so private only she and General Sterling had attended. Her stride was stronger, the limp a faint echo of what it once was. The expedited VA approvals, which had appeared in the system like a miracle just 48 hours after her coffee with the general, had granted her access to the best neurological and orthopedic specialists. The pain was still a quiet companion, but it no longer dictated the terms of her life. The atmosphere in the BX had changed, too. Or rather, her place within it had. The stares of mockery were gone, replaced by nods of quiet recognition and profound respect. The story, in its broadest, most unclassified strokes, had rippled through the base community. She was no longer the strange woman in the old jacket, she was a living piece of military lore. As she picked up a shopping basket, she saw one of the lieutenants from that day. It was Decker. He was alone, studying a display of protein bars with a serious focus. When he looked up and saw her, his face cycled through a rapid series of emotions, recognition, deep-seated shame, and finally, a quiet resolve. He approached her, not with the swagger of before, but with the humble posture of a student. Dr. Thorne, he said, stopping a few feet away. His name tag now read, Harmon, D. I wanted you to know, your story is part of our professional development curriculum now. Aris raised an eyebrow in surprise. Is that so, Lieutenant? Yes, ma'am. General Sterling introduced it himself. They don't use names or mission specifics, of course. But they use the BX incident, as it's now called, to teach us about humility, the danger of assumptions, and the debt we owe to those whose service isn't marked by shiny medals. He met her eyes. It's a lesson I will never forget. We all learn from our mistakes, Lieutenant, Aris said, her tone softening. The important thing is that we learn. Yes, ma'am, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Thank you for your service, Doctor. Then, and now. As he walked away, Aris continued her shopping, a thoughtful expression on her face. General Sterling had been true to his word and then some. The partial declassification had not only fixed her benefits but had also triggered a quiet, high-level review at the Pentagon about policy regarding veterans from redacted units. Her individual struggle had sparked a systemic change. As she completed her shopping, a young female officer with the bright, intense eyes of someone newly commissioned approached her. Her uniform was crisp, her lieutenant's bars gleaming. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice a mixture of nervousness and awe. "Are you Dr. Aris Thorne?" Aris noted the intelligence insignia on her uniform. "I am." The lieutenant snapped to attention, rendering a salute. "Lieutenant Mercer, 103rd MI Battalion." "Ma'am, we've been studying your team's methods in our advanced training. The declassified portions of Operation Nightfall have rewritten our manual on emergency extraction under asymmetric warfare conditions." For the first time in years, Aris felt a flush of pride that was entirely untethered from pain or loss. "I'm glad the lessons we learned the hard way are being of use." "They are, ma'am," Mercer assured her. "In fact, my team and I were wondering if you would ever consider speaking to our platoon. To hear the strategic thinking directly from you, it would be invaluable." 20 years of instinct screamed at her to say no, to retreat back into the shadows. But looking at the young officer's eager face, she saw not a threat to security, but a link in a chain. A legacy. "I'd be happy to speak with your platoon, Lieutenant," Aris heard herself say. "Within classification limits, of course." Mercer's face lit up. "That would be an incredible honor, ma'am." "Thank you." As the lieutenant departed, Aris felt a new sense of purpose settling over her. After decades of being a silent custodian of memories, she was becoming a teacher. Leaving the BX, she saw General Sterling walking toward her, a grim but determined look on his face. "Aris," he greeted her, foregoing the formalities. "Just the person I needed to see." "General. How can I help?" "We've located Master Sergeant O'Connell's family," he said directly. "His daughter. With the partial declassification, we can finally arrange for a proper recognition of his sacrifice. The President has authorized a posthumous award of the Air Force Cross." Aris felt the air leave her lungs. Rook. His memory would finally be honored. His daughter, she'll know he was a hero. "She will," the general confirmed. "The ceremony is next month. We'd like you to be there, to accept the medal on his behalf and present it to her. As the last surviving member of Chimera, it should be you." "I'd be honored, sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Good," he nodded. He then gestured to the restored patch on her jacket. "One last thing. We're establishing a new advanced training program at Nellis, focused on the very kind of operations Chimera specialized in. It needs a director of curriculum development. Someone with experience. Teaching was one thing. Building a legacy was another." "I'll think about it, sir." "That's all I ask," he said with a rare smile. As Aris drove away from the BX, her groceries forgotten in the passenger seat, her thoughts were on Rook, on her team, on the young faces of lieutenants like Mercer and Harmon. She had spent half her life in the shadows, defined by what she couldn't say. Now, a new path was opening before her, one where her past was not a burden to be hidden, but a lesson to be shared. She was no longer invisible. She was the ghost who had stepped into the light, ready to teach the next generation how to navigate the darkness. The story of Dr. Aris Thorne is a powerful reminder that heroes often don't wear capes or shiny uniforms. Sometimes, they wear old, faded jackets, and carry scars no one can see. Her journey from being publicly shamed to being publicly honored shows that true valor can never be permanently erased. What part of Aris's story resonated with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please remember to comment with respect for the service members, past and present, whose real-life stories echo this one.